right, I think as people are starting to come in, I think we can go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you all to the second in our series of virtual workshops. Today's workshop is Booking History from the Hayride to Music Row and features Barbara Martin Stevens. These workshops are brought to you by IBMA's Leadership Bluegrass Alumni Committee. My name is Lee Stivers, and I am the co-chair. I'm a co-chair of that committee along with Michelle Gorley. I just want to mention that we are continuing plans for presenting this series this winter. On February 21st, we have a workshop on bluegrass vocals led by Dee Dee Weiland, along with Dan Boner and Stephen Mogen. On February 13th, we have a workshop on mentoring reimagined, being led by Louisa Branscombe, who I think is on this call. So that's on March 13th. And we also have plans for April and May as well. So stay tuned for details, and we'll get those details to you soon. Before I turn this over to Katie Hogue, who is moderating today's session, just a couple of housekeeping things. This session is being recorded, and it will be posted shortly on IBMA's YouTube channel, along with the others. Your mics will be muted the entire time, but we do encourage you to put your comments or questions into the chat pod, and we'll be relaying those at the end of the session for a Q&A at the end. You may want to, I mean, we're all Zoom experts at this point, but you may want to put the view on your screen into speaker view. That may be the best way to, I find that's the best way to view these Zoom meetings. And with that, Katie, I think I'm gonna let you take it away.
All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We've had an awful lot of fun preparing for this. Barbara is up here in Boston, and we're doing this from my living room, and we're having a ball. So I'm Katie Hogue, and this is my friend Barbara Martin Stevens, and she is not only a fun gal to hang around with, but she is a wealth of information on the history of the music. She had a front row seat to a lot of the stuff that we hear about in history. And she was also the first female booking agent on Music Row in Nashville. So we've got a lot of ground to cover, and we're going to dive right in. Barbara, hi.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
So the beginning of Barbara, how did you, well, maybe not the very beginning of Barbara, you began in Memphis, then you moved to Nashville. How did you get involved with all these folks in the music industry? What was your start?
Well, I needed a job, and my girlfriend, Jean Armstrong, was working at the Tulane Hotel in the restaurant. And so she called me in. I went in and got a job, and I started work at the hotel in the restaurant. And I didn't know anything about the country music business.
And how old were you?
I was not quite 18.
Okay, so 17 years old.
17. I went to work there in the summer of 1953, and I turned 18 in October.
Okay.
But I looked older, so I was okay. And the first person I met was Bessie Malden.
Okay.
And so Bessie and I talked, and we had a little friendship going there. And then I met Jimmy Martin, and he wanted to take me out. He said, I work for Bill Monroe. I said, who's Bill Monroe? Because I didn't know anyone in the music business. And I told him if I wanted my daddy, I'd go home and get him because he was 24. So, but later on, we struck up a friendship, and I worked there until my mother called the hotel and told them to fire me.
Okay, why'd she do that?
Because of Jimmy Martin.
I
I
they
got
knew
fired
from the
a couple
beginning
of
that it was
times.
bad news, right?
Yeah. And but we became a couple. And so when Jimmy left Bill Monroe and we moved to Middletown, Ohio to be at WPFB, on the way up there, we heard J.D. Crowe on the radio. So we stopped in Lexington, and Jimmy called Crowe, and we went out to Crow's parents' house, and
Because he was 14.
Crow was 14.
Mhm.
I was 17.
Okay.
And so Jimmy asked if Crow could come to work for him at WPFB when school was out. And so Mr. Crow said, yes, he can. So Jimmy and I continued on to WPFB, and he worked there until he went to work with the Osborne brothers.
Okay.
And in August, they got a contract with RCA Victor, and we came back to Nashville. And there was Bob and Jimmy and me, and we stayed at my mother's house while they signed the contract. And then we left there and went to Mayfield, Kentucky, because Jimmy had a disc jockey that he had met, and he wanted to hear him, to let him know that they had signed a contract with RCA Victor and were going to be recording Jimmy Martin and the Osborne brothers.
And something happened on the way to Mayfield, Kentucky.
Yes. Well, Bob was driving, I was riding passenger, and Jimmy, he was always a backseat person.
So he never drove.
No,
Okay.
no, but he just told you how to drive. And so on the way, we hear Elvis Presley come on the radio singing Blue Moon of Kentucky. So Bob and I were just jiving up in the front seat, and Bob singing a verse here once in a while, and Jimmy was livid in the back seat because someone was messing up Bill Monroe's song. And so when we got to the radio station, they went in and talked to him, and then we proceeded on back to Middletown. Well, I was pregnant with Timmy, and Bob's wife, Patsy Osborne, was pregnant with Robbie, and we were going to be moving to Detroit to be part of Casey Clark's 101 Mack Avenue Barn Eggs,
Okay.
which was broadcast over WJR. And so I went back to Nashville to have Timmy, and Pat went to Pikeville, Kentucky to have a Robbie. And Jimmy and Sonny and Bob moved us to Detroit,
Okay.
where we all lived together. And
Now, did Jimmy always, you said he was mad that Elvis had covered the song. Was that the end of it?
no, later on, a couple of years down the road, he met Elvis. We met Elvis at a disc jockey convention in Nashville. And that's before he became a really big hit, because he could still walk around on the street.
Okay.
And from that time on, Jimmy became a fan of Elvis. And, you know, when he got big enough and started sending out Christmas cards, he sent us a Christmas card every year. And not too long ago, one of my sons called me Buddy and wanted to know what happened to all the Christmas cards. And I said, I don't know. They were there when I left. I don't know what happened to them. They're somewhere, or either in the garbage. But
so at this point, you've gone from Middletown, Ohio. So you started in Nashville, working at the hotel. You meet up with the band, basically. And now, why were they there? Why were they at the hotel?
they lived there because it was a cheap place to live, and they could eat in the restaurant. Because the boys, there was Charlie Klein, and he was working for Jimmy. Sonny Osborne for Bill, and Sonny Osborne was working for Bill. And they were not making a lot of money. If they made $20 a week, that was a lot of money. Very little going on the road. And most of it was made at the Opry on Friday and Saturday night. They didn't have the Opry every night back then. They had a Friday night Frolics, and they had a Saturday night Opry.
Okay.
They also had a show on WSM. So if they were lucky enough to get a gig on WSM one night a week or on the show, they would get a little more money. But they all lived there at the hotel, and those that were working in the Opry that didn't live at the hotel lived at a boarding house called Mom Up Church.
Okay,
And Mom Up Church owned Tootsie's, what
okay,
is now Tootsie's. She owned it for a long time. It was called Mom's Place.
okay,
And all the Opry people would come over when they were on break, go over to Mom's and sit down, and she always had something for them. She was a really super nice lady. And when she sold to Tootsie, it changed.
okay.
The whole place changed.
So
It was a fun time back then.
that sounds like it. It sounds like, now, when you all left Nashville was about the time that Jimmy left Bill's band, correct?
March 1954,
Okay.
he left Bill's band.
Okay,
And Bill came to me and asked me to ask Jimmy to stay with him.
Mhm.
And I told him I had no control over him.
Mhm.
You know, he wanted to be out on his own. He wanted to be a star. And Bill and I talked for about an hour,
okay,
sitting in Jimmy's room.
okay,
But Jimmy wouldn't stay.
okay. So then you and Jimmy and the Osbournes and then JD
Mhm.
are all
Well,
go.
JD was with us that summer.
Okay, he was with you, and then you go to Ohio, and then from Ohio you end up in Detroit.
In Detroit, and that's when they had the first record come out,
Okay,
2020 Vision.
okay,
But I didn't know anything about the music business, but I said to Jimmy one day, I said, you know, if we get a bunch of records and we write notes to these disc jockeys
Mhm.
and send the records to them, you might get more play.
Okay.
So Jimmy and Bob agreed. Sonny was just sort of there. You know, he didn't really take part in anything that involved business.
Mhm.
He just came and go. You know, he'd come in the house and go to bed and get up in the morning and grab something to eat and go out the back door and go away. But Jim and Bob agreed that maybe that might help.
Okay,
So I was working at Chrysler, and I would come home in the afternoon. And from the time I got home, I started writing letters and packing records and sending them to disc jockeys. And when we got letters in return, then I would respond to those
Mhm.
letters, just like I was Jimmy.
okay,
And that's how I got involved in working part of the with the music.
okay,
But from then on, it became one thing after another. And when we moved to Shreveport and had no dates, I told Jimmy, I said, I can do what Tillman Franks does, because I had been watching Tillman for months.
Mhm.
I'd go up and sit down. My office was downstairs, and I would go up to Tillman's office on my lunch hour and just sit there and watch him, or get him a cup of coffee or a glass of water or whatever he wanted. You
So
know,
you and Jimmy, so the Jimmy and the Osborne brothers kind of split ways. They went
That-
their separate ways, and he formed the Sunny Mountain Boys,
right.
signed a contract with Decca, and then you guys headed to Louisiana for the Hayride in
In
March of 58.
58.
Okay.
1958.
But you weren't working in the industry at that point. You were
Just
working
promoting.
somewhere else.
I was
Okay.
promoting his records.
Yeah, but your day job.
Yeah, I always had a day job,
Okay.
because if I didn't have a day job, we couldn't eat.
Yeah.
And once we got to Shreveport, I went to work for an investment firm, which was on the bottom floor of the building where KWKH was,
Okay.
and Tillman Frank's office. And Tillman was promoting Johnny Horton and not booking the other people on the Hayride. So I would go up there and just sit with my lunch
Mhm.
and watch him, and he liked it. He didn't know what I was doing. And so one day, it's been quite a while since Jimmy had a date,
Mhm.
and it was just the money coming in from the Hayride, which really wasn't much, about $50.
Mhm.
And so I said to Jimmy, I can do that. I can do what Tillman
Mhm.
Franks does. And Jimmy said, what makes you think you could do that? I said, I know I can do that. And he said, well, what do you need? I said, I need a contract, but I've got to read that contract. I've never read a contract.
Mhm.
And so he went to the union and got some contracts and brought them back to me. So I read it and several times. I mean, I carried it everywhere I went so that I could make sure that I had everything correct. And I already knew what I was going to do because Earl K. Long was running for governor and Jimmy Davis was running for governor. And Jimmy Davis was having Grand Ole Opry people. And I thought, I bet Earl K. Long would like to have some Opry people too. And maybe Louisiana Hayride. And so I contacted the campaign manager and sent a message to them. And they wanted some brochures and stuff. So I sent it to them and booked a week with Earl K. Long
Okay.
for Jimmy and the Sunny Mountain Boys. And then I thought, well, you know, if they do good for him, maybe I can book Carl Ballou,
Mhm.
somebody else from the Hayride. But before I got the contracts back signed, Earl K. Long was institutionalized and had to drop out of the race. But De Lesseps Story Morrison, who was the sitting mayor of New Orleans at that time, he jumped in the race. So I contacted him and got the week of dates. And so Jimmy played the dates, and then I was going to push Carl Ballou
Mhm.
and see if I could get Carl Ballou in there. And because I knew I could book. And before I could do that, Tillman Franks told Jimmy, said, tell Barbara not to do that anymore. Then I wasn't welcome to go sit in his office anymore.
Oh, you stoked the fire a little bit, didn't you?
Yes, I did. But it wasn't too long after that that we moved to Wheeling,
Okay.
and Gene Johnson needed a secretary.
Okay.
So I told him, I said, I'm looking for a job. He said, are you a secretary? I said, no, but I can be.
Mm-hmm.
And so he gave me a job, and I went to work for Gene.
At the Wheeling, West Virginia, the Wheeling
And
Opry.
the WWVA Jamboree. And Gene was in charge of all the people on the Jamboree.
Mhm.
And he booked almost all of them except for maybe Doc and Chicky.
Okay.
They booked themselves. But I knew that once I went to work for Gene, I was going to learn everything I could, more than what I had learned from Tillman. And I did. And I worked for Gene about 6 months. And
he was much more amenable to you learning from him.
oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he wanted me to learn. He taught me. He would take a letter or a contract or whatever I was writing, and he would review it and he'd show me what I was doing wrong, or he'd listen to a telephone call. And so I knew what I was going to do when I had the agency. And it wasn't going to be his, it was going to be mine. And about 6 months after I went to work for him, he came in one day and he said to me, he locked the door, and I thought, oh God, I'm gonna get fired because I'd already been fired twice because of Jimmy. And he came in and he said, no, 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 I'm not going to fire you. And I said, oh, thank goodness. And he told me he had bought a radio station in Wheeling, West Virginia, in Pittsburgh, and that he would be closing the agency. And I said, do I need to find a job? And he said, no, I'm going to give you the agency. So that very day, we went up to John Corrigan, who was the director at WWVA, and he talked to John, told him what was happening, that he was going to give me the agency. And that I was perfectly capable of booking the people on the jamboree. And so John agreed that I would book the people on the jamboree. My agency would be known as the Barbara Martin Agency, and I would be advertised nightly over Lee Moore's show. He had an all-night disc jockey show, and there would be no charge to me.
Okay.
But in place, as a quid pro quo, I was to book all of the guest acts from Nashville on the jamboree, and I would have at least once a month that I would put an act in there. Also, in return, I would get advertising for any shows I booked around them, because if they came in to work for the Friday night, for the Saturday night show, they needed a Friday night somewhere on the way up to Wheeling, and maybe a Sunday after. So I would book them a Saturday, Friday night show, say Grandpa Jones. I'd book him in Newark or at Hillbilly Park. Come Saturday, work the jamboree. Sunday, I'd get him maybe Ligonier, Pennsylvania. So he was right there in that little pocket, and he could play 3 shows and then go back to Nashville. But all of the shows would be advertised on WWVA. So that was a good bargaining tool for booking them and getting show dates for them.
Okay.
Because I gave free advertising.
It's a great strategy.
Yes. And I did that from 1961 to until 1967.
Okay, that's a long time.
Even after I moved to Nashville, I still continued to book the jamboree talent.
So what are the names of some of the people that you booked?
In Wheeling, I booked Jimmy. I booked Kirk Hansard and Lois Johnson. Are you talking about guest
Like
people?
what acts? Who did you book? Like who was on your roster?
Dottie West played a lot. Wilma Lee and Stoney Cooper played up in Wheeling a lot. Grandpa Jones was a favorite. Hawkshaw Hawkins was a favorite. Gene was not that well known up in there, but Hawkshaw was. And I booked all of the jamboree people except Doc and Chicky. There was the Vandegrift brothers. I kept them working all the time because they were an act I could book into a lot of clubs, not necessarily a lot of parks, but a lot of clubs. And I also became very involved with fair associations, because once I took over from Gene, I knew that I wanted to get involved. So I called the union to find out how to book the fair associations and the fairs and the fire carnivals. And
So explain to everyone what a fire carnival is.
a fire carnival is a carnival that's put on by the fire departments. Usually the fire departments, could be the police department, to raise funds to buy equipment. And they're very, very prevalent in Pennsylvania, New York, and Ohio has some, but I booked 90 fire carnivals in Pennsylvania in 1 year. First year I was out.
Okay.
Not all for Jimmy, but 90 altogether. And then I started going to the national associations and booking package shows and carnivals and fairs.
Okay.
Local fairs and state fairs.
Okay. So you found a niche and went in and
Yes.
filled it.
Yes. I would attend the fair associations in every state I could.
Okay.
so that I could book those, and especially in the Northeast, because WWVA was a 50,000 watt station, and it covered the northeastern part of the United States and all of the Maritime, all the way up to the Maritimes in Canada.
Okay.
So it was quite a good place to be.
Sounds like it. Now, when we were talking before, you had brought over to my house a bunch of your letters and correspondence. You were really good at corresponding with all of your people, you know.
Yes. Well, that's the only way we did it.
Well, yeah, there's no email, there's, you know.
No, we didn't have that. We wrote letters to everyone.
Yeah.
We did very little telephone calls because very few, because the telephone bill was expensive. And we always tried to keep the telephone bill under $200 a month. And that was a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And we didn't have free phone calls.
So what are some of the things that you had to work around in terms of your artists and maybe some quirkiness, or, you know, just trying to get your artists booked in certain places?
Primarily, if you had someone that was pretty well known, you could book them in the fairs, and also in the summertime, booking was no problem because you had all the parks, and you had the fairs going on, and you had the fire carnivals going on, and in the wintertime, it was mostly indoor, like a theater type thing, and or a nightclub. And people like the Vandegrift brothers, or you know, one of the all-girl bands, they would play the nightclubs, but the other acts wanted to play the theaters and the parks and the fire carnivals. So wintertime was when you booked those summer acts. And really, I don't think there was any quirkiness.
Just wrangling people, I guess, was what I'm thinking.
No.
Everybody pretty much got along. And
well, the girl bands were difficult because you put more than one girl in a room, you know, you're going to have a problem. And I found that was true, not only with the music business, but with the legal fields as well. So, but normally, most of my acts were on time. Never had a problem with them getting there or getting home. Never had one call me and say they couldn't make it to a gig. I booked people like Melba Montgomery. I booked some shows for Loretta Lynn when she was first moved, after she first moved to Nashville and needed work. You know, they needed the work and they appreciated the work. So you never had a problem with people back then.
That's good.
I don't know how it is today, but people were usually on time, sober.
That's good.
Yeah.
So after what, 7 years in Wheeling, West Virginia, you?
No, we were in Wheeling from 1960 to 1963.
Okay.
We moved back to Nashville in April of 1963.
Okay, my mistake. So you go back to Nashville. You've got this agency in Wheeling. What is your next move?
Well, I was supposed to go to work for Wilhelm Agency in Nashville because Jimmy wanted to be booked by a big agency. He didn't consider me big. I don't think he ever really considered me as a real booking agent, you know, because I was there. And even though I kept him working more than anybody ever had in his life or ever did. And so he wanted to go to work for Wilhelm, and Bob Neal had talked to him about it during the disc jockey convention.
Mhm.
And so we got to Nashville, moved into the house and everything, and went down to find out when he wanted me to come to work, and did he have anything lined up for Jimmy? And found out that Wilhelm was not going to book Jimmy. Bob told him that he just couldn't do it.
Mhm.
And so then Bob looked at me and he said, but we still want you to come to work for us.
Mhm.
And I said, no, I can't do that. If you can't book Jimmy, I can't be here. So I went home, set my typewriter up on my desk, and I started booking again. And never once closed down the Barbara Martin agency. So I continued to book there until Billy Grammer and I opened Graymar Talent Agency. And Billy was in charge of getting talent to come and sign with us, and I was the booker.
And where was that located?
We were located on 16th Avenue, directly in front of Decca Records
Okay.
and the Wilhelm Agency.
Okay. So you're
So
officially on Music Row.
We were on Music Row, but it wasn't Music Row back then. It was just 16th Avenue
Mhm.
South. And so I was across the street. By then, Bob Neal had left the Wilhelm Agency and formed his own agency.
Mhm.
And Smiley Wilson had taken over as the booking agent for Wilhelm. So we had our agency there that's when I became the only female booking agent on Music Row.
Mhm.
And we had our office there for 2 years.
Okay.
And
What was that like?
no different. It really wasn't. I'd never thought of it just being different, and I never thought of me being the only female, because I was included.
Mhm.
If someone had a meeting about a TV show or something that someone was wanting to start, I was always included
Mhm.
in all the meetings, and just walked out of their office.
Mhm.
I did a lot of work with Cedarwood and the Jim Denny agency, and Hubert Long, a lot of work with him. And we were buying each other's talent all the time.
Mhm.
So it was I never thought about me being the only female out there doing that kind of work,
Mhm.
because we had all the girls that worked in the offices were female, so it didn't dawn on me that I was the only booking agent. But in my building, our office was on the lower floor, and Jack Clements, whom
Cowboy
went by
Jack.
the Cowboy
Mhm.
Jack, he was across the hall, and Happy Wilson was behind, his office was right behind Jack's, and Happy was married to Marion Worth, and he was also with Columbia Records at
Mhm.
that time. And upstairs we had Stan Hitchcock, and so I booked Stan,
Mhm.
and he said to me one time at a rope luncheon, he said, "You ran me all over this country." I said, "I did."
That's what a good booker does.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
So what, I mean, real quick, we're gonna be running out of time. We want to make time for questions here in just a little bit, but what was Music Row, or what would have been, was to become Music Row? What was it like back then?
not like it is today, because today you never see a soul. Back then you could see Eddie Arnold, you could see the Wilburn brothers, you could see Loretta Lynn, Brenda Lee, everyone was coming in and out of the buildings. It was sort of like a circus.
Mhm.
You walk down the street, run into Mel Tillis. You walked in my office, you'd probably run into Mel Tillis because it was there every day. And, you know, you just see anybody and everybody.
Mhm.
Mary John Wilkin, always out on the street.
Mhm.
And everyone knew everyone else.
Mhm.
And it wasn't just a, hi, how are you? You know, when you saw them, you spent 30 minutes down there talking to them.
Mhm.
Dolly Parton, she was just getting started.
Okay.
And she was always out there. She was usually in the alley. And I could walk from my office over to Denny's office and see her and wave and hi or stop and talk,
Mhm.
you know. So it was really a great place.
Mhm.
Very small because we were only a couple of blocks. Victor was there on the corner where it is now, but one block down 17th and one block down 16th, and we had just about all of it.
Okay. That sounds like a great community, a lot of
It was.
camaraderie.
It was. And there wasn't a lot of competition, you know. People were not just looking out for themselves.
Yeah.
The booking agents were all in contact with each other. And if you needed a contract, you ran down, got picked up the contract and sent it out that day to your person that was buying them. You
Okay.
know, so
So speaking of camaraderie, you were also friends with Louise Scruggs. Louise is another pioneer
were.
woman in this industry. What was your friendship with Louise like?
Well, we weren't competitors because she booked only Flat and Scruggs.
Mm.
I booked Jimmy, but I also booked everybody, everyone. You know, whomever I needed on a package show or could buy at that time, I would book them. But Louise and I were just everyday girlfriends, sort of like you and me, you know. And I don't think we ever discussed the music business.
You had
Because
enough, right?
no,
During the day.
we didn't do things like that. Dottie West, I was really good friends with Dottie and never talked about the music, you know. We were just girlfriends. And so I think that was the way it was with everyone back then.
Yeah. You were also really good friends with Loretta Lynn and Patsy Cline and
Yes, Patsy, and well, Jimmy was good friends with Mooney Lynn. And so, you know, I used to tell them they were all three alike. And they were. Charlie Dick especially. So, you know, we were all just good friends. Loretta and Patsy and I, we didn't go out with the boys, you know, like the boys went out with boys. But it was just girlfriend talk, baby talk, baby talk. Loretta was pregnant with the twins at the same time I was pregnant with my daughter, Lisa. So, you know, we were all young mothers. And my business was my business.
So what made you get out of booking? Because you went on to do something else not long after that.
My last show was in Guelph, Ontario, Canada, and it featured Hank Williams Jr. and Willie Samples. And that was in September of 1967. And after that show, I knew that I couldn't make a living for my kids. So I could make more money as a waitress. By that time, I was in business with John Denny on 17th. And I had left Jimmy Martin. And I was having to split my commissions with John Denny. So you know, 15% of $100 is $7.50 to me. And even if I had 20 shows, it wasn't enough money to support myself and my kids. And so I decided, well, I will quit that job, and I went to work as a waitress. And until I got on with the city of Nashville metropolitan government, and I worked there until I remarried.
Okay.
And once I remarried, I went back to school and became a paralegal and an administrator of a law office, and also the accountant, because I had the degree. And never thought anything else about the music business. For the 45 years I lived in Florida. And one day my daughter-in-law said to me, "Didn't you have an office on 16th Avenue at one time?" And I said, "Yeah." So she had an article from the paper in Birmingham where the Historical Society was looking for people that had offices out there. And that sort of piqued my interest again in the music business. And I contacted them, and they had me come to Nashville, and they recorded me at the library. And after that, I went back home. My husband passed away, and I decided to write a book. So I wrote the book, Don't Give Your Heart to a Rambler, My Life with Jimmy Martin and the Bluegrass. And that's what got me to thinking about all that I had done. But I still had all the papers from there. And it was just a part of my life that I never thought about for 45 years.
Until now.
Until now.
Well, I'm glad we have you to tell these stories, because this is fascinating.
Thank you.
We have a few questions coming in from our audience. Louisa Branscombe, I think you know her, don't you?
I do know her.
Louisa is asking, she said, you say that the girl bands were difficult. Can you say a little bit more about that? Now, this is Louisa asking, not me, so you'll have to.
Well, for instance, they were late a lot getting to the show. Or one member didn't show up, one member quit. So we've got a new member. When's the new member coming to work? There was always a problem. Either someone was quitting and leaving and a new member was coming in, or they weren't making it to the show on time and they were going to be late. So there was always something. And I won't go into names. But if you look back and see who I booked at that time, then you'll know who I'm talking about.
Y'all can talk later. So we've also been asked, are there any good Red Allen stories? Did you know Red Allen?
I knew Red Allen, but when I was in the booking business, my focus was always on the business, never on friendships. I wasn't friends, with the people. I didn't know who played in the bands. I didn't care. All I wanted was the band to get to the date. So therefore, I didn't know a lot of the people that played in bands, or even the stars of the show. My business was with another agent or with that artist himself. And it wasn't a friendship, it was a business relationship. So Red Allen, I can't tell you any stories about him. I just knew him as a business and knew him when he worked with the Osborne brothers, things like that.
Okay, well, what about Buddy Lee? Did you know him?
Oh, Buddy Lee, I knew very well.
Okay.
Yeah, I knew Buddy and Rita and their kids, and
Okay.
and Rita They both were wrestlers. I don't know if you know that.
Like
Wrestlers.
wrestlers, professional wrestlers.
Professional
Okay.
wrestlers. And the first time I met Buddy, and Jimmy said, "You know they're wrestlers." I said, "Both of them?" And he said, "Yes." And I'd never met a female wrestler. And when I saw Rita, she was so cute. She was just the prettiest little girl, you know. I just couldn't imagine her wrestling some big woman. And of course, my mother and my grandmother and my grandfather were wrestling fans. And I used to go to the Hippodrome and save seats on wrestling night, which was Tuesday, for all my family to come to the wrestling matches. So I said, "Oh my goodness, if my grandmother and my grandfather could see me now," you know, with Buddy. But Buddy was a great person. I really loved him. And Rita, she could make the best fried potatoes you've ever eaten in your life. I'm still trying to copy them.
So if anybody's got that recipe.
But we used to go to their house all the time, constant. And Bob Neal. I love Bob and Helen Neal. They were really good people.
Okay.
They lived around the corner from us. And they had a big collie dog that got mixed up with Jimmy's hounds one time. Jimmy had his coon hounds penned in the backyard. And Bob Neal's collie got into the pen, and one of the dogs was in the heat. Bessie. She was named after Bessie Malden. Bessie got
named a hound after Bessie and Malden.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so
Any long-haired hounds after that?
I didn't know what to do. I was pretty naive. And so Bessie gave birth to 8 half collie and a half beagle hounds. But Bob, I called Bob, but I said, "Bob, you've got to come down here and get this dog." They just lived around the corner from us.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
That's funny. Now, you were telling me a story this morning about Carlton Haney. So,
Oh, yeah.
and that first bluegrass festival. Why don't
Yeah,
you?
Fincastle.
Yeah.
Well, I booked Jimmy Martin and the Sunny Mountain Boys on the show. And Jimmy had 3 days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So Sunday came time to get paid. And Carlton said to me, "Now, Barbara, I didn't have a good crowd. Can't pay all of it." I said, "Carlton, that's not true. I'm here. I saw the crowd." And I said, "You're either going to pay me or I'm going to go home and sit on your porch and I'm going to take your typewriter."
You repossessed a typewriter.
And so Carlton said, I'm going to give you almost all of it. Well, he gave me half of it. So when Jimmy came off and he was ready to go, I said, "We've got to go over to Carlton's house." And he said, "What for?" I said, "Because he didn't pay me. He didn't give me all the money." So we went over and we sat on the porch until Carlton came home. And when he came home, I said, "Carlton, I'm going to take your typewriter." And he said, No, you don't want to take my typewriter." And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to take your typewriter. Yeah, because you owe us $350. And so he said, "Well, I think I can pay you." And Carlton would just do, that. And so I said, "Okay, see if you can pay me." He went in and he got the money and he came back out. But he was always trying to get you to take a lesser amount than what you wanted,
That's
I
funny.
don't care what your fee was, it was going to be less is what he offered. I enjoyed working with him.
Oh, that's
He was a
great.
good guy.
Those are good stories. So we have another question. So your theme seems to be, I knew I could do it.
Mhm.
You say that. Was there ever a situation where you felt scared or unsure how to handle something?
No, never.
Never.
never. I had been raised in business.
Mhm.
My grandfather owned a mattress factory. My dad owned a mattress factory. And from the time I was little, they would teach me different things, you know. And when I was 13, 14 years old, even 12, I went on the trucks and picked up money and took it to the bank and made the deposits and took phone calls. I knew how to do business.
Mhm.
And business was business, whether it was in the music business or it was in the mattress business. So I knew how to do those things. And my total focus was business.
Mhm.
And I never was scared. Never.
Interesting.
I might have been, if I had to do a lot of one-on-one,
Mhm.
that would have scared me because I was very shy.
Okay.
But I didn't. I did things on the phone
Mhm.
and it was typing
Mhm.
and sending out letters. And I was a fast typist.
Mhm.
I love typing and still love it.
Mhm.
But no, I never was scared.
Okay. You were pretty mighty with your correspondence too.
Mm-hmm.
You knew how to keep up.
And everything was done with carbon paper.
Okay.
We didn't have any copy machines or anything like that.
And you still have a lot of that,
I have about 8 notebooks full of it,
of your correspondence.
of correspondence back and forth with the union. I was always a union booker,
Mhm.
licensed booker. So, and I booked union acts, and a couple of them, I keep saying the Vandergrift brothers, but they were the ones that forgot to pay their dues. And I got a reprimand from a show because we used to have to file the contract for a show. Say we were playing Newark, Ohio. We had to file a copy of that contract with the union. And the union kept up with them. I don't care where you were. You filed it with the union right there close by. And with your dues, if you fail to pay your dues, they let your booker know.
Okay.
And you got in trouble. So I still have letters from the union because of people not having paid their dues and got me in trouble. So I had to pay right away and either get those people back in the union or cancel their job because they couldn't play if they weren't in the union.
Wow, that's pretty stuff.
Well, and you wonder how they were able to keep up with all that because they didn't have computers.
Yeah,
It was just mail.
it's a lot more intense than
Yeah.
it would be now, for sure.
Yes,
You couldn't just
yes.
go online.
Well, of course, today they can't do that because of the right to work.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
So,
Well, so we've got about 5 minutes left, and I'm sure there's going to be a wrap up. But before we finish, you have got a book
I have a
coming
new
out this
book
year.
coming
Tell
out.
us about it.
My new book is with the publisher, with the University of Illinois Press right now. And I have to look up the title of it because my editor, who is Nancy Cardwell, found out that the title I had already had a book out. So now we have a new title for it, and I keep looking at it. It's called Behind the Scenes, This Business of Country and Bluegrass Music. And it talks about the music business and the business of music from the 1950s through the 2000s. And I have not only about the business that we did back in the 60s and 50s, and but through today, and stories of some of the artists that I dealt with back then, announcers, artists, disc jockeys, different people, and a chapter on the union because I dealt with the union all
Mhm.
through my career and the way the changes are now.
Mhm.
So it's supposed to be out sometime in the late spring or early summer. They're going to let me know.
So I'm sure there will be an announcement on social media and
I'll be all over Facebook with it.
well, Barbara, this is fun. I can tell you guys that this is not even half of what we've talked about in the past. You just have so many stories. We had to keep it down to a narrow focus today, but you're a treasure, and I'm so glad you're
Thank
my
you so
friend.
much. Thank y'all for having me and for being here.
I'm gonna pass it back to Lee.
Thank you, ladies. That was fantastic. That was really fascinating. Well, thank you to everyone for joining in, and remember that this is recorded, so other people who were not able to be here live will still be able to watch it. Also, remember that we have some upcoming virtual workshops planned February 21st on bluegrass vocals featuring Dee Dee Weiland, and on March 13th, Mentoring Reimagined with Louisa Branscombe. I think that wraps it up, and thanks to everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.